that mindset of, okay, what's the solution to this? How can we get creative around this? Some people really struggle having that mindset, and it's just so much easier for them to complain or find a buddy who's willing to complain with them. How do you find yourself snapping out of those moments and getting to that mindset?
Where you are right now is 100% your fault. And that might come across as like really good, like I'm proud of where I am, or it might like create a little bit of friction, but it's designed to be. I have learned that when you learn to take responsibility for your situation, the goods, the bads, the challenges, the gifts, and you say, okay, this is the hand I've been dealt. What am I going to do about it? Be solution oriented in all things. Like there's a problem. Great. What's the solution?
Thanks for joining us on the CSP Hot Hands 60 Minutes of Fire podcast. My name's Brett Wiggins, and I get to serve as your host. So what is a CSP? CSP is a Cutco sales professional. There are a lot of them out there, and they've all got a different answer to the question, why do you sell so much? Our mission is to find out the answer to that question from as many of them as possible. These next 60 minutes are designed for Cutco sales reps who desire to learn from our best in the field. So we interview top sales professionals from around the country with questions provided by their peers to make all that happen. 60 minutes of fire means we get straight to the point. Let's do it. Welcome to CSP High Ends, episode number 18. How fun. We're an adult. Yay. Excited for our guest today. One of the most respected names in the CSP world. Anytime he's on an agenda, I've got to hear him speak at NET once as a DVM, going as a guest, and that was worth the price of admission itself. We got Brandon Brown from a Pasadena office and LA division. I was fortunate enough to receive a pawn during your message, and I cherish that guy. I got it on my home office monitor. Anytime Brandon references a resource that's available to us, he's going to share it with me after our time together today, and then we'll make it available to you guys in our resource folder. So, Brandon, if you had a script or a template and it's detailed, don't feel the need to cover it right now as much detail, because we'll spend the bulk of our time on these hard-hitting questions from our CSP community. We'll put that in our resource folder so they can review on their own. I do want to directly thank those of you who submitted questions for this episode. It would not be 60 minutes of fire or very fire at all without their help. It'd be more like a Big Mac, but without any Big Mac sauce. Just not the same. We got Benji Lehman, Chelsea McDougall, and Austin Moyer having questions selected for this episode. Mr. Brown, are you ready to jam?
Let's get it.
Hey, let's do it. Let's do it. Okay, so first of all, how long have we been selling Cutco?
A little over 17 years.
Dude, so we started, so I'm a June of 2007 launch. Is that?
Yeah, right around there. I started it on 7/7/07.
Oh wow. Okay, that's special. That was
number. Yeah, it was right during our SC1 push. So I was in the heat of all the.
We have Western region. I feel like 4th of July launches are a big deal out west. You guys break a little bit later. Our summer is basically like we've started our SC2 push by that moment. So it really is too. So really heat of the summer you're starting, which I find a lot of reps that start in those push weeks sometimes become the best reps because it's all they know, which I mean, you've got some episodes on the CLSK podcast on push weeks. So that makes sense. What's your yearly sales breakdown? What's it going to end up looking like this year? What % is at the booth? What % is gifting? What service events, marketing? What's that breakdown look like?
Yeah, so I would say ballpark, I'll probably finish right around $1 million for the year. That'll be.
Congrats, by the way. Is that going to be your best year ever either way, or have you already eclipsed $1 million in the past?
I've eclipsed $1 million. I want to say this is my 3rd or 4th year getting over $1 million.
Cool.
But I've been working on trying to work less while still maintaining.
So it's a better feeling. I'm sure that first year did $1 million. It was the goal. I'm completely dedicating myself. I'm throwing some personal self-love out the door just to get it done. Now you're saying, hey, this year I did it, but I did it in a very healthy way.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think if you ask anyone who sold $1 million for the year, their first $1 million year, and this is good for anyone listening who aspires to want to sell $1 million, is that first year you do it typically is like a grind. It feels like a grind where you're just like, I'm making those extra sacrifices. I'm doing those extra events, those extra appointments to like make that happen. And you typically feel a little exhausted afterwards, but it helps you realize, what you're capable of, what's possible. Yeah. And it's like, okay, cool. How do I like reharmonize my life where I can still sustain that level of production, but also have the other pillars of my life present as well.
I'm interested to see people's first year selling $1 million and then January numbers. Because I'm sure there's all right, I just got to breathe for a little bit. I know for me, something that I have identified as an area of opportunity for me is I sometimes forget how hard I worked when I was a young manager to create the business that I have now. So there's times where I'll kind of be soft on my new managers. Whereas like, I'll have to be reminded like, no, Brett, like you really like to get this thing kicked off. Like you really grinded really, really hard. Do you find yourself battling that with your people that are in your coaching program or that you mentor do you need reminded on how hard you actually had to work to build it to where it's at now?
I still remember the grit and the grind that is required to like make that happen. I think with some of the people that I've mentored or conversations I've had with CSPs, sometimes there's a little bit of like, well, service events is what comes to mind is like, well, I want to do service events. I'm like, well, you only have 1,000 customers or you only have 500 customers. It's like, I started doing service events when I had 5,000 customers. And so to get that many customers, is a lot of shows. It's a lot of service calls, and I've done hundreds, if not thousands, of service calls. And so the grind of like doing all those appointments day in and day out, taking naps in the car, leaving at 8 a.m., getting home at 9 p.m.
Where's that awesome Starbucks with a really solid public restroom, but also the tree to sleep underneath after? Yeah, I know. For sure.
So many times neighbors are like I've seen people like, that car doesn't belong on this street. And there's some kid sleeping in this car. Like, got my little pillow.
That's an interesting way that you answered about service events, because that's one of our team recognized. And I say our team, I think I probably pushed them to recognize that I thought non-booth CPO is one of our biggest area of opportunities this coming year. And so we've started an accountability group with our CSPs around scheduling service calls and not jumping to just doing service events and whatnot. What you use the numbers like, 1,000 customers, you had 5,000 before you did a service event, whatever. Are there metrics you look at, and are there situations that you'll say service call versus service event for your reps and even for yourself? Are there situations where you will even go do an in-home service in some cases, depending on the situation?
Yeah, great question. So I'll answer the different parts of that. For me, I don't do any service calls myself, but I've put a lot of time, energy, and like just mental preparation and practice into really making the best of the service events to like maximize that. But if someone were to ask me like, how do you decide? I think in general, defaulting to service calls and really becoming like a master at service calls first and the whole process of it is a good first step. And, if you have even 500 customers and they're all in like one little pocket of an area, then I wouldn't say don't do a service event ever. It's worth trying, getting your feet wet, learning that experience. But I think too many times people like lean on that of like, oh, I just want to be more efficient with my time, when they'll schedule it, have 3 people show. And it's like, well, you should have just done 4 service calls and you would have sold more. Right. So it's just understanding the balance of both of those. And I'll typically encourage people to like do service calls first. And then when you feel like you don't have enough time and bandwidth to like work your shows, do your appointments, and everything else that you have to juggle, then that's when service events come into play because you can double or triple the amount of appointments you do in the same amount of day.
You
So
mentioned how I get the sense when you were describing your service event, you almost started smiling. Like it's an event is what I felt when you were describing that. It's kind of like when I feel like a DVM describes a division meeting, I can tell if they've put hours of prep and they're showing up 3 hours early, setting it up, make sure the music is set, everything looks good, posters are up. When you talk about setting up a service event, is there anything that you feel like you're doing differently to really make it a special occasion, whereas somebody else might say, hey, I've got my tables, I've got my booth set up and we're ready to go?
yeah, I would say I think a lot of it has to do with proper planning. And making sure that you're putting the time and energy, like you said, to have everything prepared for the event versus I find sometimes CSPs are just like, oh shoot, like I was supposed to do a service event in like a week. I should probably like reach out to Vast Action or Squid Pixels or whoever and like throw this together.
Yeah.
And so for me, like I set a standard where if I'm doing a service event, I need at least 10 people there. Like anything below that is like unacceptable for me because I knew it was like a numbers game and I've been working on like increasing my numbers. And I remember when I was averaging like 5K per service event, and I was like, well, I want to get that to 7,500. What needs to change? Well, I need to see more people. I'm not getting enough orders. So it's like I expanded my hours. I'm like now going from like 9 a.m. to 7 p.m. and really making sure that the marketing is dialed in and it's planned in advance. And I have an organized list of people who want service and the location that they are, and everything's like broken down into the certain geographical areas. So it's like, hey, Brett, when I'm doing a sharpening event in Ventura, I'll be sure to let you know. And it's just to give you proper expectations, it's going to be 2 to 3 months from now. And so I'm building like essentially follow-up lists for each of those cities along with the general marketing that I do.
You're creating urgency, you're creating scarcity of like, hey, I mean, this isn't a guarantee. That's a totally different feeling for that customer when they find out, oh my gosh, Brandon's going to be in town. We gotta make this happen. You mentioned the fact that you started viewing like, hey, I've got it at 5K in a day. I want to get 7,500. I feel like sometimes we can fall into the trap of just convincing ourselves like I'm going to show up and do my best and whatever happens and I'm just going to do my best. And I think that's fine to start. When did you find yourself starting to shift to I'm going to influence the outcome of this show or this event or this season of service and start looking at the metrics and saying, okay, here's how I can shift it from here to 1.5x or 2x? When did that start happening? And was that something that you saw somebody else do? Did you learn on your own? And how have you seen that change your business, that type of thinking?
Yeah, I would say I've always been like one of my strengths have always been to optimize whatever it is that I'm doing in general, but specifically in the Cutco business. And so I always take time to look at, all right, where are my weak points? Where are my strengths? And if I can apply 10 hours on a weakness or a strength, which is going to have a bigger multiplier. Sometimes the strength I can multiply faster, quicker, because it's already a gift of mine. Or sometimes there's a weak point that's pigeonholing my strength. And so if I spend a little bit of time there, it'll actually open the gap for both. So I kind of look at, I think something I do that's always helpful is I really carve out time each campaign, each year, and really look at like where are my areas of opportunity for growth. And I take notes on that. One thing I share with my mentees to do, and anyone listening to this or the recording, I highly recommend is like, as you go through your year, take notes of what's working and what isn't working.
Oh man, it's so great. You're journaling along the way. So when you've got that time built in to review the year, you're not spending a day remembering what happened. You're actually just reviewing what already happened, right?
Yeah, because I can't tell you how many times I used to do this and I've watched other people do it where like, this is the year I'm going to start making calls for my marketing and outbound calls, or this is the year I'm going to actually carve out enough time to do blank. And then 12 months later, you somehow forget that, or I'm never going to work this show again. Well, I have the weekend free. I might as well work it, and the same results happen. And so it's like if you really want to have like that exponential growth and like move in the direction that you want, you have to be able to reference those things, and your memory isn't going to necessarily give you the most true clarity of what you need. So that's where the journaling and the reflection takes place.
Love that. What other titles do you have in life outside of the Cutco world?
Titles,
Yeah.
just you mean like so I'm a fiance, which by the way,
Yeah,
is that what you mean by that? Yeah.
just got engaged this summer. That's exciting.
I
You got a
also
date set yet? Are we still in early? I mean, we're early phases. We're like a month or two into this thing.
early phases, but we have a general time frame. We're looking in
Cool.
August of next year, so that's exciting.
Congrats. That's awesome.
Thank you. And
Yeah.
I also just recently learned that fiance, if it's spoken in the reference of a male, is one E, and if it's a female, it's two E's. And I just learned that. So
I just learned that as
interesting.
well. Oh, that's awesome. So congrats again. That's awesome. So excited for you. What's the last fun thing you did besides slinging blades?
Let's see. I just came off my busy fair season, so I'm trying to go back a little bit.
Yeah.
I would say I've done some traveling with Lauren,
Yeah.
and we were able to go to Hawaii
Mm,
and go to a few other places, and so just we're able to carve out some fun travel time. Went camping. She's a
nice.
big camper, so I try when I can to get connected with like nature
Yep.
and be away from tech and computers. And so whenever I do that, I always come back much more balanced and grounded. And
It's
so
crazy how a huge issue, I'm stressed about it. I'm anxious. I can go outside, take a walk, and come back. And that same issue is like this big now. It's so weird, but you're right. Grounded is probably the right word. Now, is she like a backpack, tent, everything in there, and she's hiking to location, or are you guys like RV pop-up situation? What's camping look like for you?
she's a more avid camper than I am. I totally don't mind roughing it. But she's the one that like has all the equipment. She's
Got
like,
it.
oh, I got the stove and I got the tent and I got
Oh,
the
nice.
all these things. So um, it was fun. It's fun going with her because she already has a lot of the resources we need, and we just have a great time.
My wife would love to go camping if there was a bed inside of an RV involved.
Mm.
That she's not loving the camp situation.
Glamping.
Um, all right. So first, we got into service a little bit earlier, just based off your answer to some other questions. But the first question I had that I wanted to really kick off this section with is, um, I think when people think of you, they think of rhythm, they think of consistency. How do you feel like you create rhythm in your business that prevents burnout and allows you to maintain momentum throughout a calendar year? What are some keys for you when you think about year over year making that happen?
I would say a lot of it has to do with um, back to like the reflection piece. And
Mm-hmm.
I would probably say a lot of my answers will have like a thread of reflection in there because what reflection does is it allows you to like audit how you're doing, good, bad, or indifferent. And those reflection pieces give you feedback of what you need to be doing differently, um, at different points throughout the year. And so as you can imagine, like the more you're giving yourself like future clues and hints of what to do or what not to do, you begin to create a flow, or as you put it, like a rhythm,
Yep.
which then like, dominoes into consistency. And so, I can work, a 10-hour day, 12-hour day, 100-hour work week, and know that like, hey, this is what my body needs. This is what my relationship needs. This is what I need for myself before that, during that, after that, and making sure I'm giving myself those things. Otherwise, we've all been there where burnout is created, fatigue is created, and it typically takes 2, 3, 4 times longer to recover if you get to that point versus like giving yourself little charge ups and things that you need to kind of stay on the right track during those heavy seasons. So yeah.
How do you allow, I mean, did it take you a while to give yourself permission to step out of the business and audit? Because I feel like as a sales organization that knows we're going to work with a lot of people for a very, very small amount of time, when people are new, we're really pushing hard. And, there's no moment where it's like, hey, you know what? Take a moment to reflect, in the middle of their fast start or their first month or 2 months, whatever. So I feel like a lot of the people I work with that choose to go CSP, they have to shift from working as like a sprinter to a marathon runner. Was there a point where you decided like, hey, this is worth taking time out of the business and selling a little less short term to reflect every week, every month, whatever the case may be? When did that hit you? Was there a moment that it was like, all right, if I'm going to do this, I've got to create a consistent year-round program that I can feel great about versus just keep on sprinting and then pass out, sprint, pass out?
Yeah. So I think the first thing I would say is, because anyone listening to this, there's probably two lines of thinking. It's either I'm not going to do Cutco full time or for a long time. This is just for right now. Or, hey, I'm a Cutco lifer. You're typically like, in what's being played in the back of your mind is one of those two things.
Yep.
Normally there's not an in between. And so I find that even if you're a Cutco lifer, it's easier to like think in like longer stints. But if you're not, which I think is a lot of people, they're not like, oh, I'm going to be with Cutco forever. Shifting the mindset of, hey, I might not be with Cutco forever, but just in case I am, why don't I create a schedule that allows me to be more sustainable long term? And that'll pay dividends for you in a lot of different ways, just shifting that perspective. And it's kind of like just playing your cards better, so you're in a position of choice. So that's one piece. And then I think the other piece is, and I'm going to probably butcher the quote, but Benjamin Franklin says something like, an hour of planning will save you, 10 hours of doing, something like that.
I just looked it up to make sure we got you. I wanted to save you. For every minute spent in organizing, an hour is earned. So yeah, absolutely. It's an investment. It's an investment.
And people, it's easy to get into the thought of like, well, I just need to do versus be or take a step back. And so if you're do, but you're going in the wrong direction, for you to correct course takes energy in itself versus like, am I going the right direction? What adjustments do I need to make? And, what if I decide to not do this service call and just use those 2 hours to plan my week or plan my day better, what would that look like? And you end up finding that you are more productive doing the things that actually matter the most versus like just busy work. It's like, oh, I've been busy all day. It's like, well, what did you actually do today? And so being able to slow down a little bit, I think, is huge for longevity and also just efficiency in the short term too.
Yeah, I don't know when it clicked for me, but at some point I felt like, hey, I don't know if Cutco is the only thing I will ever do, but at this point, when I build it, would be weird to ever not do it to some extent. So I might as well build a business that, whether it's my main source, a source, the only source, whatever, let's make it great and let's make it efficient, make it better. And when I'm not improving the business, that's when I get into those modes of burnout, when I'm just doing it to do it. Your point, just kept doing. But man, when I'm improving the business and I'm excited about what we're creating, it's a lot easier, for sure. So yeah, I would, and and I picked up on this. Would have been, I think, 2 years ago at Net. Your message. You're very introspective. I mean, you're a thinker. You want to do things the best way possible is what I pick up on. And whether that's your business, your life, your sales process, it sounds like you like to study people a lot and kind of understand how they're thinking, what they're thinking. Why do you feel like you really love that side of things? You loved to approach the business that way. Was it a book? Was it a resource? Was it a mentor? And then what do you feel like, what's something that you do differently now that you saw yourself butchering as a newer rep, now that you kind of understand the psychology of sales a lot more?
So let's see. I would say, well, I was a part of like a mastermind group called Abundant. You probably, Ben Skemper.
Yeah.
So it was Epic, then
Yep.
Abundant. So that was like a mastermind group.
I still listen to, I don't know if you ever met Janowski as a part of that program, but Justin's got a really cool program now too. So yeah, I love those guys.
Yeah. And so in some of those like masterminds or retreats that we had, there was just a lot more question-based coaching, if you will,
Yep.
which kind of led the path of spending more time with my own thoughts. And that was kind of, I would say, a big piece to me making the connection of like, man, if I spend more time thinking and reflecting and just get into the practice of asking questions more, what kind of answers can come up. And I think another piece there was like, earlier on in the business, I had a drive to like try to be the absolute best I could be. And I wanted to like achieve at a really high level. And so for me to do that, I was like, I need to start asking myself questions that aren't being asked amongst anybody within Cutco to reach levels that have never been reached. And I think that was like a big piece that helped for like my first $1 million year. And then you asked another part two question, but I don't remember what it was.
I mean, what did you, when you were brand new to maybe rep or just CSP in general, now that you know what you know now about the psychology around sales and those questions, what did you maybe used to butcher before you approached the business that way? What was like, oh, if I would have known that 10 years ago, it would have looked way different than it did?
Um, I would say, well, the first thing that comes to mind for me is the back end component of like documenting like interactions with customers, collecting emails, even like having a CRM versus like keeping even a clean CRM, like those kind of things they've created. I've put a lot more attention into those in the last 5 years than I ever did like, 5 to 10 years ago, like those two brackets of time. And so I think the difference is that I knew that if I was going to build relationships with these customers and have them for the long term and not just like sell them something, but also like have an authentic relationship with them, I needed to put more attention into like how I was showing up for them, how I was serving them, how I was, what I was doing outside of just the interaction that I get once a year with them or once every couple of years. And so just bringing more awareness to that, I would say.
Yeah. And I think it's that once you realize that I value this relationship, taking those extra seconds to make those notes in the CRM, whatever about that individual versus like, I got to get to the next interaction at the booth or whatever the case may be. You're just committed to that process. You're committed to that person and it changes the way you're viewing that interaction. 2020. So we're like 4 years out from that now. And I think a lot of CSPs went through a major like shift in their business. A lot of people focused on different areas during 2020, 2021 that they never had before because they never had to necessarily. What's some ways that you've changed the way you approach the business since 2020? What was a quote that kept coming up around that time was like, a don't waste a disaster. Like let's what are we going to get out of this? Anything that kind of has happened during that time that you turned over, you focused on, or any ways that you've changed the way you approach the business since then that have kind of stuck with you now?
Yeah, I would probably say that the service piece, specifically like service events, that's probably been one of the bigger pivots.
Mhm.
California, in some ways, got hit the most by COVID in the sense
Yeah.
of the laws. So like when
Laws
show
and longevity, I feel like
and
it was both.
yeah, like when shows were back for a majority of the country back in like 2021, we all of our shows were still
Right.
like completely shut down. So we were definitely handicapped in that layer of the business. And so I had to get creative on like, well, what am I going to do here with what I have available to me in my market and in my territory? And that's where like service events and virtual service calls came into play. I had a whole system dialed in where like I would send out messages for like a specific area, like, hey, who wants their knife sharpened during COVID? This is like June of 2020.
Yeah.
And they would reply back and be like, all right, here's the process. You leave your knives out. I'm going to have my assistant pick them up. We're going to schedule an appointment virtually so I can show you some of the new stuff and connect the next day. And then the following day, like 2 days later, we're going to drop your knives off all sharpened. And so my assistant would like, and since I was doing pockets of areas, my assistant would go and like pick up, 7+ customers' sets of knives, take them to her house, keep everything organized, get everything sharpened. I was meeting with them in between. So I wasn't actually doing the sharpening. I was just like getting the 45-minute hour slot with them,
Yep.
and they were getting their knives dropped back off the following day. And so I was trying to do like what I could to be like respectful of the situation, make sure everyone felt safe and comfortable, sanitize the knives,
Yep.
and then also be able to create some CPO since literally we had no shows whatsoever happening.
If you're still tracking and categorizing all your own expenses, I have a message from your CPA. Stop. If you're listening to this podcast, chances are your goals include growing your sales. And one way to do that is delegating admin responsibilities by trading time for money. Rising Stock and MyBooks.pro is exactly what you need. Rising Stock is an all-encompassing financial tracking and coaching program where MyBooks.pro is exactly what it sounds like. They just do your books. You can choose to just have them track your expenses or take advantage of everything they have to offer. Do your business and your CPA a favor by scheduling a free intro call today at linktree/CSP60. That's linktr.ee/CSP60. That's linktree/CSP60 with a dot before the two E's.
Whatsoever happening.
That's such a common theme though with high achievers, not just in our business, but anywhere where it's like everybody was kind of dealt a similar hand during that time. But just hearing you describe like the creativity behind that, how that was truly like so helpful for customers during a time that they were probably cooking more than they ever had been. That mindset of, okay, what's the solution to this? How can we get creative around this? Some people really struggle having that mindset, and it's just so much easier for them to complain or find a buddy who's willing to complain with them, or just kind of take it for, I guess this is how it's going to be right now. How do you find yourself snapping out of those moments and getting to that mindset? How do you get there quickly? I'm sure it's not perfect all the time. But how do you find yourself getting there more quickly than most?
I think a big principle that I live by, and I'll share with a lot of people that I talk to, is like where you are right now is 100% your fault. And that might come across as like really good, like I'm proud of where I am, or it might like create a little bit of friction, but it's designed to be a little like evoke that, which is like where you are right now is 100% your fault. And even though you can't choose like your parents and where you live, like choices you've made over the last, 10, 20 years has led you to where you are today. And so, when you learn to, I have learned that when you learn to take responsibility for your situation, the goods, the bads, the challenges, the gifts, and you say, okay, this is the hand I've been dealt. What am I going to do about it? Is really empowering. And, my philosophy is very much of like, be solution oriented in all things. Like, there's a problem. Great. What's the solution? There's a problem in my business. There's a problem in XYZ. How do I work through this? And what's the gift? What's the lesson? And how can I take that and become a better man from this point forward? And so there's been times like in my business where, you know, massive bases that were supposed to go work got like canceled because of certain situations. And it's great. That was going to be like $100,000 of my year. And that just got wiped off my balance sheet of like my goal for the year. How am I still going to find a way to like sell what I wanted to sell for the year? And like getting creative, having, finding the solutions. And it's more of, I think for me, it's like, well, where did the solutions come from? It's making the choice of like, I'm not going to blame the circumstance that I didn't have control over. I'm going to ask myself what I can take responsibility for, what is the solution, and how am I going to move forward? And I think that alone gives you permission to start looking for answers versus sit in the justification or the excuse of whatever it is that you're dealing with.
Reminds me of heard John Berghoff say once, if I can't admit I'm part of the problem, I don't get to be part of the solution. And to your point, it is a gut punch of like, okay, I do that. Like there are moments where I'm blaming everybody else and I want a solution still, but I'm not willing to take ownership over it. Whereas, on situations where maybe there are things outside of your control, what was within your control that you did not take advantage of? Like there are L's that we take that are necessary that we have to own. So then that way we can change. So we don't want to go through it again. We've talked a lot about your experience and we've kind of hinted at it. Like as a coach, you're also helping our next generation of top performers excel. What levels do you have anything like within your coaching program? You say, hey, your goal needs to be from X to Y for the year. What's your parameters for your coaching?
I typically work with people who have sold $100,000 the previous year or more.
Yep.
And so I've worked with people shooting for 5, 6, 700K, and anywhere in between. There's always sometimes like exceptions to that rule, but that's, I would say, the main like focus group. Yep. And as far as what they're striving for, it doesn't necessarily have to be like a quantum leap. If they do, then like, let's go. I got all the tools and resources you need to make that happen. But sometimes it's just more of like, I want to work smarter. I want to be more efficient with my time. I don't have more time to go like grind it out, but with the schedule I do have, how do I take my average order from, 500 to 800? So I can work the same amount of time, but increase my growth by 30, 40%. So, for me, I'll have a conversation around like, hey, what's most important to you? What are you optimizing for? Like, what's your vision here? Not just for next year, but like 2-3 years out. And what are the steps and things we need to focus on this coming year to like set you up for the highest probability of accomplishing that?
What's the biggest leap you've had somebody on your coaching program have year over year?
I would say I've had a $150,000, maybe $200,000 jump from one year to the next.
When you're identifying that list of that you just mentioned, like, hey, what are the couple of things that are going to cause the biggest growth? When you guys are trying to identify those, and it's somebody who they haven't journaled, they haven't been logging throughout an entire year, but they're new to your program. How do you guys identify what's going to cause the biggest shift? Is it just, hey, let's dig into the stats and let's pull out what is also something you're going to be really, really excited about changing? Or there's some low hanging fruits that you're like, hey, if you're stuck around 100 to 200K and you want to make a leap, here's some really, easy low hanging fruit to start with?
Sure. Typically, stats give a lot of insight. So I'll just ask a lot of questions. What'd you sell for the year? What's the breakdown of your year? Where does it all come from? What's your average order? What's your closing percentage? On service calls, shows, things like that. And typically, as I start to like take notes of all these stats, it becomes clear to me what is needed or where there's like opportunity to work on. So that's traditionally where I'll start. And then, once I ask like, hey, what's your goal for next year? And let's say someone wants to go from like 200 to 300, I might have my own answer in my head, but I'll want to know from them like, hey, what's the two things that you feel like you need to focus on the most to make that jump from 2 to 300K? And then the other question I asked, which helps with me glean more insight from them, is, hey, your goal is 300K, Brett. What are the two biggest things that would get in the way of you selling 300K? And that helps me understand like where their stuck points are. And sometimes it's a schedule thing, sometimes it's an average order thing, but sometimes it's like a mental mind. Sometimes it's like they don't have belief in themselves. They don't have the confidence. I remember working with someone specifically who like was this close to like leaving the business, sold 10 grand the previous year. That's exception to the rule. And I was like, you need to come back in the business. I see the potential in you. Like, let's make this happen. Turns around and sells 130K the following year. And a lot of it was like self-belief, like confidence in your own ability, because that confidence, that conviction, when you're talking to a customer, transcends into like them wanting to buy the product. So I would say those things, but typically having a strong schedule, strong average order, and proper planning and confidence and belief in yourself and the different programs, like those are, I would say 80-90% of people can focus on one of those areas and have a huge jump.
What's your strategy? How do you help somebody like, because that's easy to say like, hey, just be confident in yourself. Come on, let's go. Which probably isn't a very good strategy. Hence why I'm not coaching them. You are. What is that? What are those steps? Are there any questions you ask? Like, obviously there's probably no cookie cutter answer. That's pretty deep. What does that look like, getting somebody from like, I just don't think I'm worthy and I don't think I can sell X amount in a year, moving to, or is it even important? Like, do they have to believe they can do it? Is there something different there that helps them at least attempt it?
I think a lot of it comes like, I'll share with them, hey, I know right now in this moment, you might not have a lot of confidence in your own ability. But I'm confident in my skill set and my results show that. And I'm also confident that I can teach you what I do in a simple way that anyone can implement, whether you're at 500K in career sales or 5 million in career sales. And so what I can tell you, Brett, is that if you just follow what I say and practice it diligently, that you will begin to see the results in your own business. And so I kind of meet them with like my confidence and then allow that to like seep into their own business. And it's not about like the whole year. It's like, let's just focus on this week and today and what we need to work on. Call me after and let's talk about it. And what will happen is, whether they get the sale or not, whether it's a $200 order or $2,000 order, it's like, well, what can we learn from this? Oh, we can learn that you did this well, and this was your area of opportunity. And when reps hear that, they're like, oh, I see where I missed the mark. There's like a level of excitement to be like, cool, like I want to do that again and get the same objection so I can try it again, because I see how it would have created a sale on that last one, and I want to do it again on this next one. So I think that's a piece. I also, not to get like too deep down the rabbit hole, if you will, but
let's jump in. I'm ready.
That's just more of like sometimes lack of confidence or whatever the person's like struggling with has little to do with Cutco and more to do with like a trauma response from like childhood or like a past experience. And so once I've created like um, a safe space with that person and we can
Yeah,
talk about it, sometimes like we can kind of like explore that a little bit. And that's helpful to help bring awareness to where the stuck point is, to like kind of free up some, tightened energy around that. So
for sure. Absolutely. And sometimes we spend all this time on the sales skills, the strategy and whatever. And if we don't take care of the root issue, it's kind of all for nothing. I loved your answer, Brandon, because I've banged my head against the wall with this, with our CSPs on how I can serve them and help them best for a couple of years now to help them break through into some really big performances. And you just described what I'm literally doing for every single student rep I have every time I run training. None of them believe they can sell $10,000 of Cutco in their fast start, but they all believe that our program works. And if they just do it, they've got a shot. Yeah, focusing on having all the answers versus like, dude, just this week, follow this program that's time tested. It works. And your confidence allows them to at least go, all right, let me test this guy. Let me, and then it works. Now we got a little bit more. It's like, okay, well, what else is there? You being willing to play the slow game and letting them go one step at a time is huge.
Working with Trent Booth and the Veritas leadership group over the last decade has unlocked things within me that I never knew existed until they were coached out of me. If you're listening and you feel stuck or like you have another gear that you're having a hard time getting to, Trent's offering a free intro call to any of our listeners. I love Veritas because it's an amazing combo of mentoring and coaching. I get what I need when I need it most. It's also a flat monthly rate, which is awesome for anyone looking to give it a shot with no contract and no long-term commitment. Schedule a call with Trent today by going to linktree/CSP60. That's linktr.ee/CSP60. That's linktree/CSP60 with a dot before the
What
two.
about anything else from your coaching of these guys and girls that you find a lot of young new CSPs they struggle with initially, but maybe they don't even know that it's something that is an area of opportunity, or they ignore it, or they put it off, or it's not even on their radar. And you're like, man, this is something that if somebody's first 1, 2, 3 years as a CSP, they choose to put time and effort and energy into, it would serve them so well. And you see a lot of them ignore it.
Well, a lot of people ignore it because they're not aware of it. And even if you're aware of it, it's still like it's a ninja. It just gets right in front of you. And that is limiting beliefs. I would say a lot of people, their biggest ceiling and limit is themselves and what they like believe is possible. It's like if people were to have like honest conversations with them, and let's say they're at 200K in sales, or they sell 200K a year, and I'm like, sell 400, and they're like, I don't see it. Like that's not for me. Or that person that sells 700 or 800, like that's just because it's Curtis. That's just because it's Matt or Rob or Josh or whoever, Bert. And they don't even realize what they're saying. They're just like, oh, that's them, not me. And I have empathy for that because, again, you don't even really realize what you're capable of. If you were to ask me, rewind 15 years ago, like, hey, did you ever think you were going to be able to sell, 200K back then, let alone 400, let alone 600? Be like, yeah, you're crazy. Like the highest person at that point was selling like 400,000. So you just don't think it's possible. And so I think that's where the area of opportunity is like, I call it playing in possibility. It's like, well, what is possible? What could you create? Like, let's just play in that realm. Doesn't mean you have to commit to it. Doesn't mean that, we're branding you to that number. It's just like, well, if it was possible, what would it look like? And so you're bypassing. It's like a back door to
there's so much power in just allowing yourself to get a little curious. Curious. It reminds me, I don't know if you've been around as long as I have, the name Betsy Crouch probably at least rings a bell for you. I coached with Betsy for, I think, 2 years. And I was a big what if, like worst case scenario, like it was in my head. And she goes, well, if you're going to play what if, like you got to play it both ways. And she would force me to play the what if game both ways. And it was like, oh my gosh, you're right. Like if I can play this game, why am I only playing it that way? You've also inspired, I want to get limiting belief ninja t-shirts now with like a stiff arming the ninja. Something's there. There's something there.
Yeah.
Also, dude, we got World Series next week. Pasadena, do you guys claim to be part of LA, or is it totally like, no, we're not LA, we're Pasadena, or is it all one situation?
Pasadena, the city, it's like its own municipal. It has its own like water and trash. So like to get things done in the city is way better than like the city of LA. Sure. But like we brand ourselves with like LA Rams, Dodgers.
Got it. So this is a Dodgers city where you're at. Dude, LA, New York, that's pretty epic, man. Pretty epic. All right. So we are, I like to focus on big picture questions a lot of times for the podcast. I like to focus on what is the area of opportunity my team's focused on, but we can't have you on the podcast and not ask about some booth stuff. Have to. So favorite qualifying questions to ask during interactions. What's on that list?
Favorite qualifying questions. I think I don't think there's going to be anything rocket science here, but I would say the one question that is really helpful if asked at the right time is, hey, Brett, if we found a set that came with pieces you would use, is at a price point that fit in the budget, is that something you would be open to? And so what I'm doing is seeing if they're open and willing to commit to a purchase. And you don't want to ask that too soon because it might feel awkward or too rushed. And you don't want to ask it too late either. But like after you've done a little 60-second demo, learned a little bit about who they are, what they need, what their pain points, things like that, asking that question of like, hey, I'm just curious, like if we did find you a set that came with pieces you would use at a price point that fit in the budget, is that something you'd be open to? And then when they say yes, I look at that as like, well, if this doesn't work out, that's on me, because they just told me if it fits in the budget and they would use it. I just need to make sure it fits in the budget and it's pieces they use. And so that's been
it's got to empower you for the rest of that interaction too, right? Like it's like all the nervousness, all of the like, are they into it or not? It's all gone. And now it's just like, okay, I can play offense by taking a second to really get permission that, hey, this is something that they are willing to do today. I love that. If you ever lose, I hate the word control, not a fan of the word control, but I feel like as a salesperson, you're definitely guiding conversations, right? And if you ever feel like you've lost control of that, what are some things you do or questions you ask to kind of get back in the driver's seat of an interaction?
And just to clarify the question, this is like you're in an interaction, you kind of like you said lost the direction because they're taking control. Is that
correct?
Kind of
yep.
Okay. Typically the easiest way to regain control is to ask a question, because if they ask a question in the conversation, they have to answer it. And so after they answer it, then ball's back in your court. So then you can ask another question or you can pivot from there. But sometimes you work with like it's more like men, and not all men, but certain men that have like a little bit more of a like bull mentality where it's like, I want to be in control of this. And so I'll give them that perceived control. Answer questions, let them flow the way they want. And then once the energy, if you will, is kind of like dissipated where they feel like they're in control, I'll kind of like gently take the reins by asking a question. And now they're answering my questions and I can like redirect them where I need to from that place.
Dude, by the way, that's 100% me. If I feel like I'm getting sold at any point, I immediately like tense up and it's like, oh no, we're done.
Yeah.
But again, it's through asking questions that you're regaining that. One question that came in was managing kind of all or nothing customers. So if I buy anything, I'm going to buy everything. And then it turns out, well, they say they can't afford to do that today. How do you guide that to end up with them purchasing something that works for them today? If they start out with like, hey, they're an all or nothing person, and it feels you become very aware of that early on.
Mhm. Yeah, so I think one of the things I'll say to help me hedge against that even coming up
Mm-hmm.
is say, hey, let's do this. Why don't we go ahead and I'll show you the retail price, the discounted price. If it fits in the budget, great. If not, I can always show you something different. I don't say smaller, I just say different. And so what that does is like, hey, there's always a plan B and option B. And so that kind of gives me like safe passage, if you will. And then when I get to the like close, if they're like, hey, I really like it, I want to do it, but like I can't do it right now. And they give you like, and you try to show them something smaller, and they're like, well, if we're going to do it, we're just going to do it. Like we don't want to wait in between. I'll say, hey, at that point, I'll use like a third party story as like social proof. And I'll say,
Mm,
hey, I totally understand where you're coming from, Brett. I have a lot of my customers who feel the same way, feel, felt, found. But what they came to learn was that they knew they were going to get Cutco eventually, and they realized how bad their knives were at the current moment. So they realized it would be better off having some good quality knives now versus struggling with the current knives they have at the present moment. Um, and so what's nice about this too is, and then I'll talk about the upgrade. I'm like, hey, what a lot of people do is they'll start with a smaller set with the pieces they would actually use the most, um, while keeping the price down, but it actually positions them really well for later because we have an option where you can upgrade. And here's how the upgrade works. And I explain the upgrade. And so I'll tell them, like, hey, Brett, this is the best of both worlds. You get the pieces you're going to use the most now at the lowest possible price, and it positions you later for when you want the rest of the knife set. My commitment to you is you won't spend any more money than if you just bought it all today.
mm,
So it kind of eliminates the concern unless it's a smoke screen. And if the
right.
smoke screen is like, oh, well, they weren't going to buy it anyways. And that's just where you have to kind of read in between the lines throughout the pitch.
Sure. And if you're listening right now and you're like, oh, I'm going to use that on my shift that starts in 15 minutes. Like, don't forget, like, there's hours and hours and hours of like, you're not allowed to pick what time the show starts and closes, but nobody can control how much time you put into study and prep and memorization of these scripts and objections and whatnot. I felt like you clearly have spent time making this yours, and how do you present it and feel awesome about it? Make sure, as CSP listen to this, that you're doing the exact same thing. Because so oftentimes I think people want like, what's the magic script? What do I say? And it's like, well, it's the script you're most confident about and the objection you're most confident about, and the one you practice and really put time and energy into.
Well,
But
one thing I'll just say on that too is it's not necessarily fun or glitz and glamour to like sit in your office or at a desk or at a park or fill in the blank and like review or listen to an audio or write things down. But just to like create a little bit of motivation or incentive behind it is like, think about the last couple days you worked behind a booth. Maybe it was this last weekend. And if I were to ask you, like, how many people walked away that were interested but could have potentially been closed? One, two, three, four people. Well, let's just say it's two people, which is probably 4 to 6 people. Well, what were they looking at? And typically the people that walk are the larger orders, so you're talking 1,000, 2,000, 3,000. So that's where you're like missing $2,000 to $10,000 of potential CPO on these larger orders because you haven't quite learned how to like close those objections. So what's that worth to you? Is 5 hours, 10 hours of extra preparation before that show starts Monday through Thursday, that extra 10 hours worth it? Because that extra 10 hours could convert to an extra 4,000 CPO.
Yeah, because I think anybody would say, if you let me work at the show 10 more hours and you're going to give me $5,000 CPO, I would do that every time. We just don't view it that way. Got to pick your pain, right? Is it the pain of sitting on your own and reading the script, or leaving the show and be like, gosh darn it, I missed today.
And you're going to be there anyways.
Exactly, right? Last question for you. And you can take a moment to think about it too. Don't feel like you need something right away. But what's something that I should have asked you today that you feel like would have helped our team a lot?
You see, Brett, I didn't plan on any questions. You're like, don't think of any questions.
I literally and just so you guys know, when I schedule people for the podcast, the best part and how I think people agree to is I'm like, just show up. Just show. You have to prepare nothing. Yeah. So apparently I am asking you to prepare something now.
If you were optimizing, at your full potential, what is possible in 2025? And be very careful and cautious not to allow like the limiting belief thoughts come into mind, because it's so easy to like default to like, oh, well, I can't do that, and like kind of pull yourself back. But there's a version of us, and all of us, everyone here on this call, anyone listening to it, where there's like a greater potential version of ourselves. And I'm of the belief that like, with God creating us, we deserve to like uncover our full potential, to make him proud, to make our future spouses proud, kids proud. And so really spending time exploring that question, and just, again, playing in the realm of possibility, just to see what comes up. And it doesn't mean you go after that number next year, but it, starts to help you think in a way that you probably weren't thinking before. So,
yeah, if you view it that way, it's kind of one of the best forms of respect to our creator, of finding out like what he made us be capable of. And it makes sense why there's been year over year tons of growth in your business. And I would say this year, even if it's not your best year ever, it sounds like growth wise, it was one of the best years ever, because CPO per hour worked sounds like it was your best ever. That's a fun conversation to have. That's fun math to do. How high can I make that number? Versus, yeah, those first couple of years creating, we talked about $1 million a year. It's like by any means necessary. Well, now I'm expanded to that. How can I get even better at it? We're in such a unique opportunity and situation in Cutco, Brandon, where nobody's ever required to give back. Think about how many hours of preparation or time you've been, whether it's on stage or on a podcast like this or on another team's call, where we give back so willingly, I feel like. And the CSP community is like, I feel like I went to Net a couple of years ago and I came back and said, guys, like, scrap the SLC plan. Like, we need Dave and Josh and team to plan SLC for the managers, because it's such a different vibe in such a great, awesome way. And I love our management team, but there's so many times where you hear about somebody who's a top performer and you see them from afar and all the accolades and all of the recognition, and you can create ideas in your head of how they would be in real life and in person. And man, you are so kind, so well thought out, so much humility.
I've just loved getting to watch you from afar, getting to see you in net, but then also just today. It's so great. And I think that you're somebody worth being led by. And I know you've got a lot of people that you coach, and I've talked to many of them, and it's always an absolutely like glowing review about how much you care and how much you've done for them. And just thanks so much for making time today, man. I know you didn't have to, and especially coming off big show season, I'm sure it would have been nice to sleep in a little extra today. But hooked it up for us. So dude, just thank you so much for making time. We appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you for your persistent follow-up too, because I've been busy.
Gentle
Yeah.
follow-up. Yeah.
Gentle.
See, if I had your sales skills, this may have happened a long time ago, but I'm in it for the long run. Okay.
When it was supposed to happen.
I proved the B-backs happen. They can happen. Okay. If you enjoyed today, be sure to subscribe, turn on those notifications so you don't miss maybe the 15 minutes of flames version of this episode with all the highlights packed in real concise for you, or our next 60 minutes of fire. If you've got anybody that you'd love to see on the podcast, make sure you go to our link and submit nominations. We've still got plenty of openings for this year. We will see you next time. Have a great day. Thanks for listening. And for some of you watching, I want to remind you that all resources from today can be found at linktree/CSP60. That's linktr.ee/CSP60. That's linktree/CSP60 with a dot before the EE. If you want to be a member of our live Zoom audience for one of our upcoming shows, email bwiggins@vectormarketing.com. That's BWIGGINS@vectormarketing.com. If you loved what you heard today, I'd be honored if you followed, subscribed, or even rated us on whatever platform you use to find your 60 minutes of fire. We'll see you next time.